everybody. It's so fabulous to see you all here in person, and a big shout out to all of our participants who are Zooming in to this very session and will continue to do so for the next 3 days. It's a wonderful pleasure to have you all here. My name is Sharon Graham-Davies and I'm the convener of the conference, and I want to acknowledge the lands on which we stand, the lands of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. One of the reasons I was really keen to join Monash is because they don't tend to see problems, but rather opportunities. And so when we brainstormed a conference that would be hybrid, spread across 4 different campus hubs in 4 different countries, along with the Second Life presence, they didn't say no. I think many times they wished they had, given the complexity of all of it, but here we are. So in saying that, this conference would not be possible without the support of so many people, but Adi, Arisha, and most especially Catherine, who really needs a big round of applause. Thank you. Now, we've got a very tight schedule, and that's about all I'm going to say. And so I apologise to our speakers for not giving them the elaborate introductions that they deserve. But I'm going to keep us all to time and introduce our first speaker, Professor Abid Khan, who is Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Vice President Global Engagement. Abid, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sharon. Actually, I just got back from Italy on Sunday and was travelling with the gig students that were doing that round there, and just the looks on their faces of how happy they all were was wonderful, and I know that people are looking forward to getting out across Asia too on that programme. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today as well, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And good afternoon to you all. Distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome you all here today to the opening of the Asian Studies Association of Australia Biennial Conference. I'm particularly delighted that we can meet delegates here on our Clayton campus, which is actually our largest campus, and acknowledge colleagues joining from across the world, including those at our hubs in Indonesia, India, Malaysia and China. The ASAA plays an incredibly important role in amplifying the voice of Asian studies here in Australia. And I'm pleased to note that Monash, which stands as Australia's largest and most global research-intensive university, that we play an important role in ensuring Australia's sustained engagement with Asia. Since its first students joined in the early 60s, Monash has grown into one of the world's top institutions for education, research and innovation excellence. And since that inception, which occurred at the time of the original Colombo Plan, the university has retained a strong connection with Asia. Monash now has more than 87,000 students studying across our Australian and international campus locations. 44% of these are international students, and 90% of those are from Asian countries. Demonstrating the university's commitment to the region, Monash's first overseas campus was established in Malaysia in 1988. That campus now hosts over 9,500 students and around 300 PhDs conducting locally relevant research. In 2008, we established the Iitb Monash Research Academy, a unique research partnership between Monash University and the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. The Academy delivers innovative solutions through multidisciplinary research projects across areas of strategic importance to industry and to Australian and Indian society. In 2012, Monash became the first foreign university to be granted a license to operate a graduate school in China. This collaboration with Southeast University also now has an active research institute associated with it. And most recently, Monash has also become Indonesia's first locally based foreign university, with its first student cohort commencing studies in 2021. Our research links with our partners across Asia have a long history of steady growth. The collaborations include many impact-focused, large-scale research projects across the region, Examples include the World Mosquito Programme, aimed at eliminating dengue, and RISE, aimed at raising the health and well-being of people in informal settlements. As one clear indicator of the level of activity, we have had almost 12,000 co-publications with our partners across Asia over the last 5 years. Additionally, through research and engagement activities spanning decades, our academics have established numerous cross-sector partnerships, ranging from government bodies to cultural bodies to NGOs and companies seeking research and training-based solutions. The engagement between Australia and Asia grows deeper every year, and the outlook is positive, with opportunities on many fronts for increased collaboration, particularly around the shared challenges of our time, many of which will play out through and across this region. Perhaps one of the most significant examples of this positive outlook was the official opening of the Monash Indonesia campus earlier this year. Monash is proud to be the first foreign university invited and approved by the Indonesian government to establish a campus there. And with the ongoing support of our stakeholders, including our own government's New Colombo plan, we will be sending many groups of students to Asia as part of our commitment to strengthening relationships between our regions. We're also dedicated to growing the next generation of Asia-literate graduates to be leaders of change and in solving global problems. This will be done through signature programs like the Global Immersion Guarantee, which received the 2020 International Education Association of Australia Excellence Award for Best Practice in International Education, and the Australian Financial Review Higher Education Award in the International Education category. I would also like to acknowledge here the success of the Monash Herbfeith Indonesia Engagement Centre. As one of the university's flagship centres, Herbfeith is a hub for engaging Indonesia, building on the depth of Monash legacies and partnering with diverse people and institutions. My thanks to the Herbfeith Centre staff, its director, Sharon Davies, our co-hosts, the LLCL, and all those involved in bringing this conference together. As I noted, Monash is committed to growing a generation of Asia-literate Australian graduates with a deep understanding and appreciation of our region. And this conference is a wonderful opportunity to bring people together on this journey. My congratulations to you all, and I hope you all have a very successful conference. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce Professor Kate McGregor, ASAA President, to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Professor Khan, for the very kind words about the ASAA. We are very excited to be here. And I was, in fact, the convener of the 2020 conference, which had to be cancelled 1 month out due to the COVID lockdown in Melbourne. So I, perhaps more than anybody else, am very excited to be here, realising this conference that I've kind of dreamed about for the last 4 years, actually. So first of all, I would like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations on whose unceded lands we're gathered today. I pay my respects to the elders, past, present and emerging. And in the context of our association, which seeks to promote the learning of Asian languages and a deep understanding of Asian cultures and knowledge systems, I'd also like to acknowledge the importance of Indigenous languages, cultures and knowledge systems in this country, and also to thank Charlie for the very special smoking ceremony which welcomed us to country. And I would also like to say it's fantastic to be here in person and also to have so many people joining us online. And I would like to give my extreme thanks to the conference committee and Monash University for hosting this conference in very challenging circumstances and also doing it hybrid at the same time. It's really amazing what you've done. And today it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Khan Karapen Guitis, who is an OAM, who is the CEO and founder of the Asylum Centre Resource Centre. He is a human rights lawyer and a social worker as well as a philanthropist. And reading his bio, I was very moved to read about his background and his passion for human rights, which comes from his personal experience of growing up in Australia in a working class Greek family with experiences of racism and of being the grandchild also of refugees from the Pontian genocide in Anatolia. So Con will be talking to us today about the work, I assume, of the ASRC in the context of our wonderful conference theme on social justice in pandemic times. So over to Con.
Good afternoon, everyone. Professor Davies, if you can please let me know when I'm at 10 minutes and then when I've got 2 minutes to go, because I don't script my talks. I want to start by acknowledging that we're gathering on the land of the Kulin Nation, on unceded land, and pay my respects to elders both past and present. It's NAIDOC Week. And so the theme of this week is about getting up, about being allies with First Nations people. The theme I've been asked to speak about, social justice in pandemic times. Well, there's lots of promises about recognition of First Nations people in our Constitution, of reconciliation, of treaty here in Victoria, but promising something and delivering something is very different. So when we do talk about social justice, whether it's here or in any other country, unless you're doing justice by the Indigenous people of your country, you can't even be at the table having a conversation about social justice. So what do I talk about today? I was thinking about that just as I was sitting there, and I'm thinking, here's what I'd like to talk about. Social justice in pandemic times. What this pandemic has highlighted for me are the incredible fault lines of inequity, of inequality, the fault lines of our inhumanity. I run a charity called the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre. I started it 21 years ago as a project with a group of students I was teaching. It is now the largest independent human rights organisation in Australia. It's helped tens of thousands of people seeking asylum, refugees, takes no money from the Australian government on principle, and delivers everything from employment, education, to the beautiful food you're eating through our social enterprises, to housing, to legal, to medical care. But the fact that it exists is an indictment on this country, because my charity exists 21 years later because the majority of people that I support have no right to work, have no right to go to university, have no right to healthcare, and have no right to a safety net. What does social injustice look like? This pandemic has highlighted. I can tell you that. Injustice looks like people seeking asylum being left during this pandemic without a safety net. There was no job keeper, there was no job seeker, there was no safety net. There was no concern as to whether or not they could access vaccines. In fact, we had to step up and run our own vaccination clinics. There was no concern about the fact that they were left behind. The same happened for migrants and international students. Most international students throughout the Asia-Pacific region had to rely on food banks to survive, a community that contributes billions of dollars to this country, and they were left to fend for themselves outside of the work of some universities. Does that look like justice to you? Refugees stranded in Indonesia since 2014, 14,000 of them with family here who should be accepted by our country, but are banned and forbidden from coming here. Does that look like justice to you? On the 19th of July, it is 10 years since we reopened detention camps in Papua New Guinea and Nauru. My government spends $4.3 million per human being to torture people, to leave people in squalor. $4.3 million per person. And on the 19th of July, they will enter their 10th year. We are spending more than $10 billion over the last decade to harm people. What is really interesting is the people I work with come from 60 different nations. Some are within the Asia-Pacific region, places like Myanmar, Sri Lanka, China, that are refugee producing. Others are places that are dumping grounds. And over the last decade, what has shamed me is our relationship, a colonialist mentality towards our region, whether it's mocking our neighbours in places like Fiji as water levels rise and we refuse to act on climate change, whether it's dumping refugees in Papua New Guinea and Nauru, or leaving them stranded in Indonesia, or cutting funding to the UNHCR. How can we possibly as a country speak up for human rights and social justice when we have been a moral vacuum of that for the last 10 years, but then judge our Asian neighbours? It is a really interesting time about, well, what does it look like going forward? I'm really concerned that this pandemic is not going to lead to an opening of our hearts and minds, but a hardening of them. As our borders have closed and they gradually open, who will they open for? We had the most shameful landmark in the last month of 100 million people for the first time in recorded human history being displaced or seeking asylum. All driven by war, the greed of man, the failure to act on climate change. And as we think of a globalised community and the idea of wanting to be global when it comes to education and it comes to employment and when it comes to business, we stop thinking about that when it comes to the freedom and movement of people. Whether it's people fleeing the Ukraine or whether it's people fleeing Myanmar. And the conversation we need to have is one about, well, how are we going to protect refugees in 2022? How are we going to open our borders? One of the interesting things for my charity 21 years later is asking myself the challenge around, as part of civil society, as part of the non-for-profit sector, how do I use my power, my status, and my privilege? How do I make sure that my own organisation, which is a byproduct of colonisation, the idea of whiteness and white knowledge and white story and white history, just like we do to First Nations people here, that this is a superior knowledge? How do we work as partners and as allies with our Asian neighbours? What I'm really interested in my organisation now is about a process of decolonisation. And what's been really interesting during this pandemic, I can talk about the things I'm proud of. We kept our doors open. We helped 3 to 4 times as many people. We spent millions of dollars on health, on food, on housing, before we'd even raised the money because it was the right thing to do. No one died. We kept our doors open with most charities closed theirs because they were too afraid to stay open during the pandemic. We innovated. We kept people safe. We scaled and responded and saved thousands of people's lives without any support from the Australian government. I'm very proud of that. We used our independence to protect refugees, to stop draconian and punitive and cruel laws, and to make sure that people were freed from detention centres, both in our region and in our country. And we have a new government with optimism and hope. But promises and outcomes are very different things. And what we need right now is courage. So when we face into the enormity of this, we can ask ourselves, well, what can we do here? And for myself, after 21 years of running my charity, I've asked myself, well, what am I going to do with my power and my privilege and my profile and my purpose? And how do I start sharing it? What I'm most excited about is about how do I go out of business? How do I find a way for my charity to truly close its doors? And what interests me there is about how do I transfer power to the very refugees that I exist to serve? At a time where we have tougher borders and higher walls and policy that is held by this government too of turning back refugees at sea, colluding with countries like Sri Lanka that continue to harm its people and persecute minorities in breach of international law, that continues to this day. We continue to see Asia and the Pacific region as a place to warehouse people, rather than us coming and working together with our region with respect and recognising that our region should be treated as equals and going, how do we build protection for people when they are seeking protection and dignity for people in times of transit and insecurity? Most of these are women and girls. And what I'm excited about is the conversations we're having are, how do we take our resources and our knowledge over the last 21 years and share it with the Asia-Pacific region? And we've been proactively reaching out, going, could we play a role? We would love to learn from you as equals. Can you teach us what we need to know about regional frameworks? Can you teach us about what it means to have this conversation in your regions, the complexity and the challenges and the difficulties, to make sure that we are not speaking from a place of paternalism or as white saviours, but as a place of allies and equals together? And we're putting our money where our mouth is. We've just launched one of the largest global investments. It's modest by our terms, but it's one of the largest investments, more than what the UNHCR is actually spending, on investing in refugee leadership in our region and in capability building, led again by refugees themselves, telling us, here's the expertise and knowledge we'd like you to share with us. And we are building the next generation of leaders in our own organisation that are diverse, that reflect our community. We're bringing in affirmative action targets. We've trained all our staff in anti-racism practice, unconscious bias, white privilege, allyship. I'm having these conversations because so often when we talk about our region, it's performative. So often when we talk about a region, it's tokenism. It's a celebration of arts and music and food. But when it comes to sharing power, when it comes to sharing platforms, when it comes to being heard and centered, that's often the last thing that happens in these conversations. And one of the things that I'm finding the most thrilling and most rewarding thing that I'm doing right now is going, how do I share and transfer power? Because I look at what is happening right now to social justice in pandemic times, and I'm afraid. I'm really concerned that we are going backwards, that we have not grasped the urgency of climate change, that we have not grasped the urgency of the refugee crisis, that while we open our hearts to people from Ukraine, we close them at the same time to people from Afghanistan. When more than 6 months later, girls in that country are still denied the right to go to school. And that we have genocides happening in our own region on our doorstep. That we're a country that continues to prosecute whistleblowers who expose our misdeeds and our corruption in Timor-Leste. If we are going to be honest about tackling social justice in our region, then we need truth and reconciliation. We need reparations. We need to have a dialogue as equals, not as us as a country coming to save or teach or who knows better. And when I think about refugee protection and the conversations we're having with the new Albanese government, is one of going, well, how are you going to lead in the region? If we don't take more, if we don't stop turning people back at sea, if we don't stop offshoring refugees in camps in Nauru and Papua New Guinea, why should anyone in the Asia-Pacific region listen to us? What moral authority do we have if we ourselves are in contravention of every significant human rights convention that we were one of the most original signatories of? Let me in the last couple of minutes go back to something smaller than that. Every day at the charity that I run in Footscray and in Dandenong, I have people coming from all around the world who have fled war and torture and persecution. And I think about how easily it could easily be me or my mum or my late father or my yaya and papu. In Greek culture, we have a term called philoxenia, which is love of the stranger, love for the stranger. Most cultures have something like that, and it's the understanding that we could be the stranger, and that it's the lottery of time and place, where I was born, as to whether or not I'm born into a democracy and into freedom or safety or into a country of tyranny and oppression. Every day I think about the people that come through the door who have fled tyranny and war and persecution, and they simply want safety and protection. There's a global truth when it comes to social justice and what it looks like. What does justice look like? I am seen, I am loved, I am heard, I am valued, I am welcomed, I have a place, and I have purpose. And so when we think about social policy, and we think about legislation, and we think about political leadership in our region, how are we furthering that? We cannot speak of social justice in our region if we do not have action on climate change, if we do not have equity when it comes to things like health, literacy, protection for women and girls in our region, including our own country, action when it comes to First Nations people, economic equality and participation. So I think this pandemic offers us an incredible moment in time, and that it shows the haves and the have-nots, and it highlights more than ever before, how am I going for time? It highlights more than ever before the disparities between the two. Every day, I remain just as shocked that I'm having to deal with people in one of the richest countries in the world that are without health care. There are 19,000 people we're fighting for at the moment with refugees who have been found to be refugees in this country and aren't allowed to call this country home. They can't come to university. They can't travel. They can't sponsor their families. 10 years of just waiting and of waiting and of waiting and of waiting. When we think about this pandemic and the idea that it's all over, in Australia, 13 times as many people from Middle Eastern backgrounds died of COVID. 9 times as many people from Greek and Italian backgrounds died of COVID. That doesn't tell me we have equity in this country or equality in this country. And the further we go outside of Australia and into our region, the disparity and the inequality and the legacy of our own actions in our region are glaringly obvious. And so there's a real urgency for us as people who want to be leaders or see ourselves as leaders, wanting to work in our region around what are we standing for? What are we going to lead for? How are we creating space for women? How are we creating space for people of colour? How are we creating space for lived experience wherever we are? And how are we building together? Because I can tell you now, I'm not waiting on this government as much as I'm hopeful to be the one that's going to have the courage to transform this country and its role in our region to the degree that it wants. It's not. And I don't think many countries in our region are going to do the same. So it is going to require us as a civil society to be willing to will that change, to mobilise and to organise, and to understand that our allies aren't just in our spaces. One of the things that has been so jarring in the charity sector is how broken it is how silent it is how most of it failed during the pandemic to actually rise to the challenge. And it was so busy just trying to survive or compete against each other, rather than ask, how can we come together? We have a shared common ground. And we often talk about intersectionality, but we rarely work that way. And in our region right now, we are fighting for the rights of LGBTIQA+ people, the rights of women and girls, the rights of Indigenous people, the rights of refugees, the need for action on climate change, the need for action on global poverty in our region. But how often are we working together as one, as allies together? And so my invitation to you is for those who are working in a region on key human rights issues that would like to find other allies to work with. I can tell you the refugee community here and in the Asia Pacific region is keen to work together because those issues are all our issues. We don't exist in little boxes. And I think there's an incredible opportunity to build a powerful, intersectional, inclusive movement for social justice. We know we are stronger together, but we need to start coming together and planning as one community, as one regional family together to try to create the sort of region that we would like. Because right now, the things that we're not talking enough about are human rights. We're talking about recovery. But how can you have a society that's recovering from the pandemic if human rights are at the centre of it? We're talking about the pandemic being over, and yet disproportionate numbers of migrants and refugees and people of colour and women and girls are being left behind right now. Nothing has ended. The challenge has just begun. And I think it is on all of us together to come together and to be fearless and to be brave and to be courageous. That might be my cue to finish. So I am going to stop there. Thank you for having me. The last thing I want to say in 5 seconds is I'm optimistic and hopeful because the one thing that this pandemic has taught me as well is the incredible humanity and decency of everyday people. And if we catalyse, inspire and mobilise that, we can do anything together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Con. Such powerful words as always. I first heard you speak, I won't give your age away, but quite a long time. We were both very, very young, and I can still remember the power that had on me. So thank you very, very much. I'm delighted to welcome our next speaker. As you do at these things, you sit around a table imagining who you would love to come and speak. And Hang Vo's name came up. She is CEO of White Line and chair of the Victorian Pride Centre. So please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Sharon. And Con, I can listen to you talk all day. So thank you so much for everything that you do for asylum seekers and refugees. Hello, everyone. I'm Hang. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm really delighted to be here. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners and custodians of the land in which we're here, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And of course, extend a warm welcome to all First Nations people joining us, and that we stand beside you as allies, not just during NAIDOC week, but every day. It's truly wonderful to be back on campus. It's been a long time since I've been here as an undergraduate, and glad that I gave myself plenty of time to actually find my way around to a campus that has vastly, vastly changed. Hello to everyone who's also joining us online, either here or overseas. So I think what I'll talk about today, it really actually builds on very well from what Con has shared. The theme for this year's conference is social justice. So social justice for me means everyone has the right to equitable opportunities to fulfil their potential. I use the words right and equitable very purposefully. Social justice is a human right. It's not a nice to have. And equity recognises that we don't all start life from the same place or the same basis. To achieve social justice, we have to address the root causes of injustice and inequity. We need to change institutions. And systems that make policy decisions that actually perpetuate inequality. Decisions that impact access to healthcare, to education, to income distribution, to housing. These include governments, corporates, businesses, universities, and indeed the charity sector of which I'm a part of. One way to drive change is to ensure that people in positions of power and authority truly represent the diversity of the people they're here to serve, the community. My focus today is representation in leadership as a powerful tool to achieve social justice. When people in positions of power have their own lived experience, I believe they make better decisions. I'd like to share my personal story as a way to demonstrate how representation in leadership truly can make positive change. I genuinely believe that we can't be what we can't see. This is particularly important given that if you consider today, we've just learned recently through the ABS data that over 50% of Australians are today of migrant background, either born overseas or have parents born overseas. I was 7 years old when my family arrived in Melbourne as part of the first wave of Vietnamese boat people in 1978 seeking asylum. With 5 children under 13 years old, Mum and Dad escaped on a fishing boat together with extended family. We were the lucky ones. After several months in Malaysia, there was no embassy, no consulate, and no queue for us to actually apply to come to Australia. So we went back on the boat to make our way to Darwin. When we got to Jakarta to refuel, the Australian government, with bipartisan support, actually rescued us and kept us safe while they processed us and gave us refugee status and eventually flown to Melbourne, to Springvale, just a few suburbs from here. It's a very, very different Australia then to what it is today. Despite their hard work and determination, Mum and Dad could not make ends meet. Dad was unwell for most of my high school years, and Mum was the sole breadwinner. Growing up in the 1980s, every summer before we went back to school, my siblings and I would sit around and make up elaborate stories about the Christmas presents that we got, the camping trip that we took, elaborate stories because we wanted to fit in. We wanted to be like the Reynolds across the road. In truth, we're Buddhist and we don't celebrate Christmas. The 3 eldest children, including myself, worked every summer to help Mum and Dad pay for school fees and uniform. But we just wanted to fit in. And for most of my adult life and career, I worked really hard to ensure that my refugee background, growing up in poverty, being a gay woman, didn't affect how people view me and my capabilities. That my background, who I am, does not mean that I'm not as smart or capable as the next person. I convinced myself that it didn't matter that I'm the only Asian woman, the only Asian lesbian, the only Asian woman, lesbian refugee at a board table, in an executive team, because I can be just as good as the next person. I truly believe that my socio-economic background, my refugee background, my gender and sexuality were deficits I had to overcome. People in positions of authority and power simply do not look like me. And when they do, their capabilities become less important than the colour of their skin. Their talent becomes less important than the diversity boxes that they tick. So I became really good at fitting in. I learned to adapt to the social norms of the circles that I found myself. I also learned that fitting in eroded the essence of who I am, to be like others and not myself. This changed, however, when others began to see something special and unique in me that sets me apart from others. I was lucky to have amazing mentors who took me under their wing, encouraged me to share my story. They helped me to understand that my lived experience has led to my dogged determination, my ability to bounce back no matter what obstacles came my way, my genuine understanding of disadvantage, and importantly, a deep understanding for those excluded from society. They saw in me something that I didn't see in myself. I was well into my 40s until I built the courage to share my story. There's always a rawness in actually being so vulnerable and visible, but I've found that the more I share my story, the more people came up to thank me for sharing their story. An East Timorese young woman came up to me after a presentation at the Pride Centre. She could hardly speak. She could hardly believe that here was a person in a leadership role, commanding an audience. It was someone who looked like her. A highly respected Aboriginal elder, an academic, a leader in her own right, came up to me after one of my talks and gave me the warmest embrace. I'd never met her before. She thanked me for telling her story, because no matter what seat she had at the table, she felt she had to fit in with everyone else. A woman from regional Victoria came to thank me for having the courage to acknowledge the shame that I felt growing up poor, because for most of her life, she hid the fact that she was poor and from regional Victoria. A Vietnamese elder said she was so proud to see me as a young Vietnamese leader continue to fight to be visible, because we can't be complacent. While diversity in leadership can at times feel unachievable, I really believe that our time is now. We have a platform. In Australia, we are seeing real change. Our Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, is a great example of diversity in leadership. We're seeing the positive impact she's having already. Her Asian heritage gives her deep understanding and empathy to connect with regional and global partners. What a joy it is to see elected members like Dr. Kyo, who you hear from shortly, and my own local member, Michelle Anandaraja, people who represent the diversity of their constituents. And of course, Australian of the Year, Dylan Alcott, former Paralympian wheelchair tennis player and disability advocate. He's the first person with a visible disability to receive the Australian of the Year in its history. His purpose is visibility to change perception, because when he grew up, no one on TV, radio, or newspaper looked like him. Representation in leadership is a powerful tool to create a more just society. Systems and institutions will be fairer when people responsible for them genuinely represent the communities that they serve. When we talk about social change, we often talk about hope for the next generation. I'd like to end by reflecting that I feel hope right now. We are seeing an accelerated pace of change right now in my generation. Let's not wait any longer. Thank you.
Now, our last speaker of the night also has an incredible story of getting to where he has, and he might share a little bit of that with us tonight. So please let me introduce Dr. Tien Kiew, MP, member for South Eastern Metro, to say a few words. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Before I begin, I want to acknowledge the traditional owner and custodian of the land we gather here today and elsewhere in Australia, and also welcome for the people on Zoom from different countries. I also want to pay respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging, and also welcome any First Nation people who are here tonight. This week is also very important week. It's a NIDOC week, and it's a chance. It's not just the week, but it's also a time to remind people that we could come together, celebrate the culture, the history, and the achievements of the First Nation people. I would like to encourage you to engage with the important events and the storytelling opportunities. It could be at the art exhibitions, such as those currently on display at the National Gallery of Victoria and the Maroondah Federation Estate Gallery. Also the flag raising ceremonies at Stonington Corporate Centre or the Aboriginal Achievements League in Thornbury. Also, there are many seminars and online conversation with the Indigenous elders I would encourage you to take part in. There are many ways we can proactively engage, support, and learn from Australian history and First Nation people, not only this week, but every day and also into the future. I now want to thank you, Monash University and the Monash Hub Faith Indonesia Engagement Center for inviting me here this evening. I'm also here on behalf of the Minister for Multicultural Affairs, Ross Spence. She sent her best wishes for the conference. Australia, and particularly Victoria, is very multicultural. As some of the speakers before me has mentioned, that we have a very diverse population. 48.2% of people in Australia has one parent born overseas, or up to nearly 30% actually born overseas in our population. This is the insight from the statistic, very strongly reflective of Australia today. And we are very proud of the diverse population that we have. And particularly Victoria, we are, if not the most multicultural and diverse state in Australia. We are the state that truly lives and breathes the value of multiculturalism. And particularly the Asian community have made and continue to make enormous contribution, be cultural, could be social, economic, and many other contributions to our state. As some of the first multicultural communities to arrive in Australia, Asian communities have made an indelible mark on our life in the state, throughout from the CBD to all corners of the state. And these communities were striving for social justice and equity. And the efforts underpin the sacrifices and the personal story and experiences. Just like the speaker just before me, I also was I am a former refugee, also came from Vietnam. As a boat person, I did land in Malaysia and was there for some time, a refugee camp. And then I got some humanitarian visa to come to Australia, in fact, to Brisbane. And it's been some years ago, but my path a little bit different. I went on to study and the love of my life in science. And I just have some exchange with Professor Khan that we also were spending some time at Oxford, but they're very different period, so we did not meet there. And now I found myself as a politician, as an MP representing for the Southeastern Metropolitan, because I think that the time for me to have some contribution from a different platform. During the last 2 years has been a very challenging time for the whole community, and more so for the multicultural community. And more so for the refugees, for the asylum seekers, and also for the overseas students. As Con mentioned before me, during that time, people had not only no job, but they have no food. They have to queue up for a food bank, and the state government could only do so much. And thanks to the community and the efforts of the charity, like the Asylum Seekers Resource Center and the Food Bank and many others communities from different backgrounds that help some of the people. But it is something that we have to recognize that it's a big shortcoming for this country. Also, during that time, there have been some increased report of racial attacks and racism towards particularly the Asian community and also other Khmer community. It is, however, reassuring that what can be done when the academics, cultural community leaders and researchers such as yourself come together. And as a government, as a state government, we can only do so much, but we have provided programs and initiatives to combat racism and support the communities. I can name a few of them, including the local anti-racism initiative grant program that promoted positive intercultural understanding of the challenges faced by culturally and linguistically diverse community, and also the multicultural communities outreach programs and the priority response to multicultural communities grant programs. These programs led to Victoria's diverse community having somewhat and alleviate some of the better accessibility and alleviate some of the difficulty and challenges, and also provided resources and information for people. I want to end by commending the team at Monash University and the Monash Herb Faith Indonesia Engagement Center for hosting this conference. The 24th biannual conference. You missed one in 2020, but now time to catch up. Thank you for continuing to empower and educate thought leaders to implement positive change and bring the voices of multicultural communities in Victoria and around the globe to the forefront of decision-making and recovering initiatives. On behalf of the Victorian government, thank you for all you have done to support academic excellence and the wider Victorian community. Australia is part of Asia Pacific, not just geographically, but also geopolitically and also economically as well. So we have to engage. So I hope the conference and the contribution of the researchers will deepen our understanding of the region and better our engagement and collaboration with the countries in the Asia Pacific. So I wish you all the best for the conference. Thank you.
Thank you to all our fabulous sponsors of this event. Many of you attended the Postgrad Day today, which was very generously sponsored by the Sydney Southeast Asia Centre, SEAC, so thank you very much for that support. So this brings an end to the formal proceedings for tonight. I'll just do a quick plug for our first actual conference proper keynote that's happening tonight. So you can zoom in to Monash, Indonesia, or if you're lucky enough to be in Jakarta, you can go there in person. That session is chaired by the president of Monash, Indonesia, Professor Andrew McIntyre. So you can zoom into that. So farewell to people who are now with us on Zoom, and hopefully you can zoom into that event. And for the rest of us who are here, we can retire to the lobby to enjoy some drinks and canapes. So we'll see you all at the conference. And thank you again to all our speakers. Thank you.